August 1944. The air inside the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia, is thick with humidity and impending disaster. On the heavy oak tables, the situation map of France is a chaotic sea of red and blue grease pencil marks. The Allied invasion of Normandy is 2 months old. The front is breaking, yet the German High Command remains paralyzed by a single, haunting question. Where is he? To the north, at the Pas de Calais, the elite German 15th Army sits idle, fully equipped and dug in, refusing to reinforce the crumbling lines in Normandy. They are not moving because they are waiting for what they believe is the real invasion. They are waiting for the only Allied commander whose operational tempo they view as a mirror of their own. They are waiting for General George S. Patton. This hesitation is not born of incompetence, but of a specific professional terror. While other Allied generals fought with logistics and crushing mass, the German General Staff believed Patton fought with something far more dangerous. A weapon they thought belonged only to them. The Blitzkrieg. But to understand why the Wehrmacht respected this one man above all others, we must first understand the war they expected to fight. To understand the unique anomaly of General Patton, one must first view the Second World War from the other side of the hill, from the perspective of the German General Staff. For generations, the Prussian and later German military doctrine was built on a single, uncompromising foundation: Bewegungskrieg, or maneuver warfare. Germany, located in the center of Europe and surrounded by potential enemies, could not win a long, drawn-out war of attrition. They lacked the oil, the rubber, and the manpower for a static slugfest. Their survival depended on speed, encirclement, and the annihilation of the enemy's will to fight before his superior resources could be brought to bear. By 1943, the German commanders, men like Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt and Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, had formed a concrete psychological profile of their Western adversaries. They respected the British and American soldier for his tenacity, and they feared the overwhelming industrial might of the Allied war machine. They knew that if an American artillery barrage began, it would be ceaseless. They knew that for every Panzer IV destroyed, 3 Sherman tanks would take its place. But they did not fear Allied generalship. In the eyes of the Wehrmacht, Allied commanders were methodical, cautious, and painfully predictable. The British, scarred by the slaughter of the First World War, preferred the set-piece battle. A commander like Bernard Montgomery would not move until every supply truck was in place, every artillery piece zeroed, and victory was mathematically assured. This allowed the Germans, even when vastly outnumbered, to retreat in good order, regroup, and strike back. The Americans, while fresher and more aggressive, were viewed as tied to their logistics. The standard American doctrine relied on the broad front strategy, moving armies forward in unison to protect flanks and supply lines. It was a strategy of insurance, designed to minimize risk. To a German Panzer general, raised on the principles of risk-taking and independent initiative, this was a plodding, bureaucratic way of war. It was formidable, yes, like a steamroller, but it could be calculated. A German division commander knew that if he engaged an American unit, the Americans would likely stop at nightfall. He knew that if the Americans captured a hill, they would pause to consolidate rather than immediately exploiting the breakthrough. This predictability was the Wehrmacht's greatest asset in the West. It allowed them to move their thin reserves to the exact point of danger, knowing the Allies would not exploit the gaps elsewhere. They were fighting a war of mathematics against an enemy who refused to gamble. The German officer corps believed that the Allied command structure stifled individual initiative, relying on push-button warfare rather than the intuitive art of command. They felt superior because they believed they were the only ones playing chess, while the Allies were playing checkers. But intelligence reports from North Africa began to disrupt this comfortable assessment. Amidst the methodical advance of the Anglo-American forces, a different signature appeared on the battlefield. Intercepted radio traffic and combat reports spoke of an American commander who ignored the standard doctrine of flank protection. A commander who drove his men through the night, who commandeered fuel, and who seemed less interested in capturing terrain than in destroying the enemy army itself. The German high command began to see a style of leadership that felt uncomfortably familiar. It wasn't the steamroller, it was the spear. The first ripples of this strategic anomaly were felt in the aftermath of the Battle of Kasserine Pass in early 1943. The Americans had been humiliated by Rommel's Afrika Korps, their lines broken and their confidence shattered. German intelligence viewed the US Army as green, disorganized, and tactically naive. But within weeks of that defeat, the radio chatter changed. The American II Corps, previously sluggish and prone to panic, suddenly began maneuvering with rigid discipline and aggressive intent. A new voice was commanding the frequency, one that demanded immediate results. But it was the invasion of Sicily in July 1943, Operation Husky, that solidified the German obsession with George S. Patton. The Allied plan was classic doctrine. General Montgomery's British Eighth Army would be the sword, driving up the east coast to Messina to cut off the German retreat, while the Americans under Patton acted as the shield, guarding the British flank. It was a role designed for the cautious. Patton, however, refused to be a shield. While Montgomery stalled against fierce German resistance near Catania, bogged down by the very predictability the Wehrmacht exploited, Patton broke the rules. He split his forces and launched a high-speed armored thrust across the impossible terrain of the Sicilian interior. He captured Palermo in a lightning campaign that stunned both his British allies and his German enemies. He didn't stop for rest. He didn't stop for supply consolidation. He drove his men until they dropped, reportedly telling his officers, "Go until the last tank spins out of gas, then get out and walk." To the German commanders defending Sicily, specifically Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, this was a revelation. Here was an American general executing a Blitzkrieg. Patton's race to Messina was not just a contest of ego against Montgomery. It was a demonstration of operational velocity that the Germans thought impossible for a democratic army. He beat the British to the city, but more importantly, he proved he could move faster than the Wehrmacht could retreat. German reports from the front began to distinguish Patton from his peers. They noted his placement at the front lines, unusual for a corps or army commander, and his ability to improvise. In the rigid hierarchy of military analysis, the Germans categorized generals by their operational art. Eisenhower was seen as a political manager, Bradley as a competent logistician, Montgomery as a methodical attritionist. Patton was categorized as a draftgänger, a daredevil, a man of action. By late 1943, the Patton legend had crossed the lines. He wasn't just a general. He was a tactical distinctiveness. The German high command realized that where Patton was, the attack would not be a broad front push, but a narrow, violent piercing of the line. This realization shifted the entire strategic calculus of the Western Front. They were no longer just fighting the US Army. They were fighting a specific, dangerous variable that refused to adhere to the safe, slow rules of engagement. As the Allies prepared for the invasion of France, this fear would be weaponized against them in one of the greatest deceptions of the war. What exactly made Patton's battlefield behavior so distinct that it altered the defensive strategy of an entire enemy nation? The answer lies in the fundamental difference between firepower and tempo. The standard Allied solution to a German strongpoint was to halt, call in air support, and level the grid square with artillery. It was effective, but it bought the Germans time to withdraw their high-value Panzer units to the next defensive line. Patton, however, operated on a doctrine of relentless pressure. Hold them by the nose and kick them in the pants. While other commanders worried about their flanks, Patton worried about the enemy's recovery time. He understood that a retreating enemy is disorganized, frightened, and vulnerable. If you stop to secure your own flank, you give the enemy permission to reorganize. If you keep moving, even at great risk, the enemy remains in a state of permanent chaos. This aligned perfectly with the German concept of Schwerpunkt, focusing maximum effort at a single point to break through. This philosophy fundamentally changed how his troops used their equipment. The American M4 Sherman tank was, by 1944, technologically inferior to the German Panther and Tiger tanks. In a head-to-head slugfest, the Sherman was a death trap. German tank crews called them Ronsons, because they lit up the first time you hit them. Standard American tank destroyer doctrine was to hang back and ambush. Patton flipped this. He used the Sherman's speed and mechanical reliability to outmaneuver the heavier, slower German cats. He didn't ask his tankers to survive a hit. He asked them to move so fast they wouldn't get hit. Hermann Balck, one of Germany's most gifted Panzer generals, later noted that while most American attacks could be parried because they telegraphed their punches, Patton's units seemed to flow like water through cracks in a dam. Patton preached audacity, audacity, always audacity. He famously ordered his commanders not to dig in. We will not dig slit trenches. Jagged, irregular lines of earthworks are not only non-military, they are an invitation to disaster. To the German soldier in the foxhole, this created a terrifying psychological reality. When fighting the British or regular American units, a lull in the shooting meant the enemy was sleeping or eating. When fighting Patton's Third Army, a lull meant they were already behind you. This tactical relentlessness laid the groundwork for the second, and perhaps more significant, angle of the German obsession: the intelligence war. The German respect for Patton was so profound that the Allies weaponized it in the most elaborate deception of the war, Operation Fortitude South. As the date for the Normandy invasion approached in 1944, the Allies needed to convince Hitler that the landings on the beaches of Normandy were merely a feint, a distraction from the real invasion, which would come later at the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. To sell this lie, they created a phantom army, the first United States Army group. It existed only on paper, in radio waves, and in fields of rubber. The Allies deployed hundreds of inflatable tanks, plywood aircraft, and fake landing craft across the fields of southeast England, directly across from Calais. They generated fake radio traffic, simulating the movement of thousands of troops. But the centerpiece of this deception, the one detail that made the lie believable to the suspicious minds at the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, was its commander. General Eisenhower appointed George Patton as the commander of this ghost army. German intelligence logic was simple. Patton is their best offensive general. Therefore, Patton will lead the main attack. If Patton is in Dover staring at Calais, then the invasion is coming at Calais. This single assumption paralyzed the German military machine. When the first Allied boots hit Omaha and Utah beaches on June 6, 1944, the German 15th Army, a massive force of over 150,000 men, and Panzer divisions, sat idle just a few hundred miles away in Pas-de-Calais. They could have tipped the balance in Normandy. They could have pushed the Allies back into the sea, but they didn't move. Why? Because Hitler and his generals were waiting for Patton. Even weeks after D-Day, as the fighting in the hedgerows of Normandy turned into a bloody stalemate, the German High Command refused to release the 15th Army. They were convinced that Normandy was a trap designed to draw their reserves away from the real blow that Patton would deliver. It wasn't until Patton actually arrived in Normandy, secretly weeks later, that the spell was broken. By then, it was too late. The deception had bought the Allies the most precious commodity in war, a foothold. But the fear of Patton wasn't just about where he wasn't. It was about what happened when he finally appeared. The Germans respected him because he possessed a quality rare in the Allied coalition: ruthlessness. He was viewed as a soldier's general in the Prussian mold, a man who understood that war is not a management problem to be solved, but a contest of wills to be won. When he finally took command of the Third Army in France, the theoretical fear turned into a very real, very rapid collapse. July 1944. The Allied invasion is choking to death in the hedgerows of Normandy. For 6 weeks the war has been measured in yards. The fields are slaughterhouses. The advance is glacial. To the German commanders, this confirms their bias. The Allies are strong but slow. They believe they have contained the beachhead. But on August 1st, the strategic equation changes instantly. The Third United States Army is officially activated, and George Patton is taken off the leash. The moment Patton's tanks hit the bottleneck at Avranches, the nature of the war in the West transforms from a static brawl into a high-speed chase. While standard doctrine dictated securing the corridor and widening the breach, Patton orders the exact opposite, pushing whole divisions through a single road, bumper to bumper, disregarding air attack risks to maximize speed. In 72 hours, he pours 7 divisions into the open French countryside. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, commanding the German forces in the west, sends desperate cables to Berlin. He reports that the left flank has simply vanished. There is no line anymore. Patton's columns are fanning out in 3 directions simultaneously: west into Brittany, south to the Loire, and east toward Paris. This is the Blitzkrieg in reverse that the Germans had feared. The terror culminates in the Falaise pocket. As the British and Canadians press from the north and the Americans hook from the south, the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army are caught in a tightening noose. Patton, driving from the south, reaches the town of Argentan. He can see the trap closing. He asks permission to cross the army boundary line and drive north to meet the British, sealing the Germans in completely. General Bradley orders him to halt, fearing accidental collisions between Allied armies. Patton is furious, famously shouting, "Let me go on to Falaise and we'll drive the British back into the sea for another Dunkirk." Though the gap remains open long enough for some Germans to escape, the result is a catastrophe for the Wehrmacht. The roads are choked with the burning wreckage of the German army. Pilots describe the smell of rotting flesh reaching thousands of feet into the air. For the German generals, the retreat across France is not just a defeat, it is a lesson in velocity. They find they cannot form a new defensive line on the Seine, or the Somme, or the Meuse, because by the time their staff officers draw the line on a map, Patton's tanks are already across the river. He is moving faster than their intelligence can process. But the ultimate test of this fear, and the moment that would cement his legend, was yet to come. It would happen in the freezing snow of the Ardennes, where the Germans would gamble everything on the assumption that the Allies were too slow to stop them. December 16th, 1944. The mist hangs low over the Ardennes forest. Under the cover of heavy fog that grounds Allied air power, Adolf Hitler plays his final card. Operation Wacht am Rhein, or Watch on the Rhine, launches 200,000 German troops and nearly 1,000 tanks against the thinnest section of the Allied line. It is a massive, desperate gamble designed to split the British and American armies, capture the port of Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. The German strategic timetable is built on a single rigid assumption: Allied inertia. German planning staff calculate that even if the Americans react quickly, it will take them at least 2 weeks to rotate forces from the north or south to counterattack the German flank. In the chaotic first days, the plan seems to work. American units are overrun. Panic spreads. The bulge in the line grows deeper by the hour. On December 19th, General Eisenhower calls an emergency meeting at a damp barracks in Verdun. The mood is grim. He asks his commanders how long it will take to shift their attacks to hit the Germans. The other generals estimate days, perhaps weeks, to disengage from their current battles. Then Eisenhower turns to Patton, whose Third Army is currently heavily engaged in the Saar region, miles to the south. Patton stands up. "I can attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours. The room falls silent. British officers scoff. Even Eisenhower is skeptical. To disengage an army of hundreds of thousands of men from active combat, turn them 90 degrees to the left, and march them over icy roads in the middle of a blizzard to attack a new enemy is a logistical impossibility. It violates every rule of military physics. But Patton isn't guessing. He had already ordered his staff to prepare 3 distinct plans for a counterattack days before the meeting, anticipating the German move. He makes a quick phone call to his headquarters with a simple code word: play ball. What follows is one of the most complex maneuvers in military history. In less than 2 days, Patton pivots the entire Third Army. Over 133,000 tanks and trucks move through a blinding snowstorm. They move without sleep, directed by MPs standing in freezing mud. To the German 7th Army, protecting the southern flank of the offensive, this movement is invisible until it is too late. General Erich Brandenberger, commanding the German flank, believes he is safe. His intelligence reports place Patton's army engaging the Siegfried Line in the south. But on December 22nd, the horizon to his south explodes. The Third Army doesn't just arrive, it slams into the German flank with the force of a freight train. The siege of Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne is surrounded and running low on ammunition, becomes the focal point. German commander Hasso von Manteuffel is frantically trying to crush the American paratroopers before help arrives. He knows that if Patton breaks through, the German offensive is dead. On December 26th, the lead tanks of Patton's 4th Armored Division, commanded by Crichton Abrams, smash through the German encirclement and link up with the 101st. The German gamble collapses. They had bet on Allied slowness, and they lost to Patton's speed. The psychological blow to the Wehrmacht is catastrophic. They realize that not only is the offensive over, but the road to the Rhine is now open, and the man leading the charge is the one man they hoped to avoid. The bulge has been flattened, and the race to the heart of Germany begins. Spring 1945. The Battle of the Bulge is over, and the Third Reich is in its death throes. Yet, the Wehrmacht still holds the west bank of the Rhine, a formidable natural barrier they believe will buy them months to negotiate or regroup. Allied command plans a methodical, broad advance to clear this sector. Patton, however, sees geometry where others see geography. He ignores the plan in a campaign often cited by military historians as his masterpiece, the Palatinate Campaign. Patton coordinates a complex ballet of violence with General Alexander Patch's 7th Army. Instead of a frontal assault, Patton drives his armoured divisions deep behind the German lines near Koblenz, turning south to trap the German 1st and 7th Armies against the Rhine River. The speed of this manoeuvre is so disorienting that German units are often captured while still in marching formation. Unaware the enemy is already miles behind them, German logistics officers attempting to supply the front drive their trucks directly into American checkpoints. The cohesion of the German defense evaporates. In just 10 days, the Wehrmacht loses over 100,000 men in the Saar-Palatinate Triangle, killed, wounded, or captured. A distinct psychological phenomenon emerges among the German rank and file. While fighting the Russians in the east was a desperate struggle for survival, and fighting the British was a stubborn endurance test, fighting Patton became a matter of inevitability. German commanders began to issue informal orders. If you are cut off by the Third Army, surrender quickly. There was no shame in losing to the cowboy general, because he was viewed as a force of nature. By the time Patton crosses the Rhine, urinating in the river as he does so, a deliberate gesture of defiance, the German army in the west has ceased to function as a coordinated military force. The Third Army reports capturing over 300,000 enemy soldiers in the final months of the war. They didn't just defeat the enemy, they processed them. The terrifying velocity that had frightened the generals in 1943 had now consumed their armies entirely. May 1945, the guns are silent. In a converted luxury hotel in Mondorf-les-Bains, Luxembourg, known as Camp Ashkan, the surviving elite of the Third Reich are held as prisoners. Göring, Ribbentrop, Rundstedt, Kesselring. Here, amidst the ruin of their ambitions, Allied intelligence officers conduct exhaustive interviews to reconstruct the war. When the conversation turns to Allied leadership, the polite diplomatic answers fade, and a consistent professional consensus emerges. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the doyen of the German officer corps, is asked simply to name the best Allied commander he faced. He does not hesitate. Patton, he replies, he was your best. Rundstedt elaborates that while other generals were competent managers of material, Patton was a Feldherr, a lord of the field. To the German mind, Patton was the only Allied general who understood the true grammar of war. That speed is more lethal than ammunition. General Günther Blumentritt, Rundstedt's chief of staff, offers a more technical assessment. He explains to his interrogators that the German High Command prepared their defensive plans based on the travel time of standard Allied units. They calculated that if an American division broke through, it would take X hours to refuel and Y hours to receive orders. Patton destroyed these actuarial tables. We were extremely appreciative of General Patton, Blumentritt notes with dry irony. He was the most aggressive Panzer general of the Allies, and a man of incredible initiative. He was the one we feared most. Perhaps the most telling tribute comes from General Hermann Balck, the master of armoured warfare who had fought Patton to a standstill in the mud of Lorraine in late 1944. Balck, a man who rarely handed out compliments, admitted that Patton was the only general who forced him to improvise constantly. Against others, Balck could use his standard playbook. Against Patton, the playbook was useless because the situation changed every hour. The ultimate validation of the Patton feared is not found in American propaganda, but in the archives of the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. In their situation reports, Patton's name appears with a frequency and urgency unmatched by any other commander. They did not track him because he was famous. They tracked him because he was an existential threat. They recognized in him a kindred spirit, a man who rejected the modern, industrial approach to war in favor of the ancient, violent art of the attack. In the end, the German generals feared Patton because, in many ways, he was the only Allied general who fought like a German. History often attempts to reduce the Second World War to a contest of spreadsheets. A war won by tonnage, factories, and fuel. It is easy to look at the overwhelming material advantage of the Allies and conclude that victory was inevitable, that the individual traits of generals mattered little against the crushing weight of industrial production. But the archives of the German High Command tell a different, more human story. They remind us that even in the age of mechanized slaughter, the personality of a commander can bend the geometry of the battlefield. George S. Patton remains a paradox. He was an American aristocrat who cursed like a stable boy, a modern cavalryman who believed in reincarnation, a champion of democracy who fought with the autocratic ruthlessness of a Prussian field marshal. And therein lies the irony that haunted the wolf's lair. The German generals, the architects of Blitzkrieg, did not fear the American industrialist or the British administrator. They feared the one man who looked at a map and saw what they saw. That audacity is the only currency that matters in war. They feared him not because he was better equipped, but because he was unpredictable. In a conflict defined by rigid doctrines and attrition, Patton was chaos weaponized. He proved that while logistics might win campaigns, it is speed and terror that break armies. When the German generals looked across the lines, they didn't see a cowboy. They saw a reflection of their own lost doctrine, turned against them with devastating finality. The fear of Patton was, ultimately, the fear of the initiative lost. And as the dust settled over Europe in 1945, the silent tanks and surrendered armies of the Wehrmacht stood as a testament to a singular truth. In the grim calculus of combat, the most dangerous weapon is a mind that refuses to wait.